Today, North Korea and South Korea are counted among the most talked about countries in the world. On one side is South Korea, a country known for modern technology, K-pop, Samsung, and democracy. And on the other side is North Korea, one of the most closed and mysterious countries in the world. But the most surprising fact is that they were once a single country. Their language, culture, food, and history were almost identical. So what exactly happened that Korea was divided into two countries, and how did they become enemies of each other? This is not just the story of Korea, but also a story of World War, politics, communism, and capitalism. Hello, friends. Today, we will learn how the foundation for the division of North and South Korea was laid, and how one country was split into two separate nations. Be sure to watch the video until the end. So let's begin the story of Korea in a very simple way. The story begins thousands of years ago in Korea. What we know today as North Korea and South Korea was once a single land known as the Korean Peninsula. At that time, there was no single country here. Instead, several small but powerful kingdoms existed. Gradually, wars, alliances, and struggles for power took place among these kingdoms, and this process gave rise to Korea's ancient civilization. In Korean history, 5 major kingdoms and dynasties are considered the most important: Goguryeo, Baekje, Silla, Goryeo, and the Joseon dynasty. Among them, Goguryeo was famous for its powerful army and vast empire. Baekje was regarded as a center of art, culture, and trade, while Silla promoted science and Buddhist culture. Over time, Silla brought the other kingdoms under its control and unified a large part of the Korean peninsula. After that came the Goryeo dynasty, which gave Korea a new identity. It was from the word Goryeo that the name Korea was later derived, a name that is known throughout the world today. However, Korea's true golden age began in 1392, when the Joseon dynasty was established. This dynasty lasted for nearly 500 years and is considered the most important period in Korean history. During the Joseon dynasty, culture, science, and education in Korea developed rapidly. It was during this period that one of the world's most unique and scientifically designed writing systems, Hangul, was created. Before that, it was very difficult for ordinary people to read and write, but after the creation of Hangul, education began to reach the general public. During the Joseon period, art, literature, music, and architecture also reached their peak. Palaces, temples, and traditional Korean buildings were constructed, and their beauty continues to attract people even today. During this time, the influence of Confucianism also increased greatly. Discipline, respect for family, education, and moral values began to be given great importance in society. From the king to ordinary citizens, everyone followed Confucian principles. But there was another reason why Korea had a unique identity in the world. At that time, Korea had very little contact with foreign countries. The entry of foreigners was limited, and Korea wanted to protect its culture from outside influences. For this reason, Western countries gave Korea a name, the Hermit Kingdom, meaning a mysterious country that remained almost isolated from the rest of the world. However, by the 19th century, the world was changing rapidly. European powers and Japan were expanding their influence across Asia. The era of new technology, modern weapons, and imperialism had already begun. And this was the moment when a great storm was about to arrive in Korea's peaceful history.
Now, the second chapter of this story is about to begin, in which you will learn how and why Japan decided to take control of Korea. By the end of the 19th century, the world had changed completely. The major powers of Europe were expanding their empires across Asia and Africa. At the same time, Japan was rapidly becoming modern and powerful. In 1868, a major transformation known as the Meiji Restoration took place in Japan. Japan changed its old system and began developing a modern army, industries, and technology similar to those of Western countries. Within just a few years, Japan came to be regarded as one of the strongest powers in Asia. However, Japan no longer wanted to limit itself to development alone. Its dream was to build a vast empire across Asia. And the most important place on the path to achieving that dream was Korea. For Japan, Korea was not just a neighboring country, it was a strategic gateway. This was because Korea's geographical location was extremely important. Korea was situated between China and Japan. If any powerful nation gained control of Korea, it could extend its influence across much of East Asia. Japan feared that if Russia or China gained control over Korea, Japan's own security could be threatened. That is why Japan was determined to bring Korea under its influence at any cost. In addition, Korea possessed valuable natural resources, such as coal, iron, and fertile agricultural land. Japan wanted to use these resources to support its growing industries and military. Before long, Korea gradually became the center of a struggle among three major powers: China, Russia, and Japan. At that time, Korea had long been under China's influence. China considered itself Korea's protector. However, Japan had begun challenging China's dominance. This tension led to the First Sino-Japanese War, which lasted from 1894 to 1895. The war was fought between China and Japan over influence in Korea. Japan's modern military decisively defeated China. As a result of this victory, China's influence over Korea was almost completely eliminated, and in this way, Japan's influence over Korea grew rapidly. But the story did not end there. After China, Russia also turned its attention toward Korea, and soon a struggle between Russia and Japan over Korea began. Now, Russia also wanted to expand its influence in Korea and the Manchurian region. Russia had a massive army and was searching for warm water ports. For this reason, Korea was strategically very important to Russia. As a result, Japan and Russia came face to face. And in 1904, the Russo-Japanese War began. The whole world believed that the powerful Russian Empire would win easily. But the exact opposite happened. With modern military strategies and swift attacks, Japan defeated Russia. This was a shocking moment in history because, for the first time, an Asian nation had defeated a major European power in war. After this victory, by now, Korea had come almost completely under Japan's control. First, Japan turned Korea into its sphere of influence. Then it took control of Korea's politics and military. And finally, in 1910, Japan officially annexed Korea into its empire. And this is where the most difficult and painful chapter of Korean history began. After defeating Russia, Japan had become one of the most powerful nations in Asia. Korea was now almost entirely under its control. But the real darkness was only beginning. In 1910, Japan officially annexed Korea into its empire, and the next 35 years were filled with pain, struggle, and the fight for freedom for the Korean people. What did Japan do to the people of Korea, and how did World War II change the fate of the entire Korean peninsula? We will find out in the next part. Now let's start with Chapter 3 of Korean History. Korea under Japanese rule, 1910 to 1945. During the period of Japanese rule, the Japanese government tried to make Korea a complete part of its empire. Pressure was placed on the culture, language, and national identity of the Korean people. Japanese began to be taught in schools, and the Japanese language was promoted in government administration as well. Many Koreans were forced to adopt Japanese names. In 1919, frustrated by colonial rule, the Korean people launched a major peaceful movement demanding independence for the first time. This movement became known as the March 1st movement. Millions of people took to the streets and began demanding freedom. However, the Japanese authorities suppressed the movement harshly. During Japanese rule, Korea's resources, agriculture, and industries were utilized to meet Japan's needs. Japan crushed the independence movement with great brutality. Afterward, many Korean leaders fled abroad and continued the struggle for independence. One of these leaders was Kim Il-sung, who would later become the founder of North Korea. In 1939, World War II began. As the war progressed, many Koreans were mobilized to work in factories, mines, and other war-related industries. Japan was actively involved in the war and continuously needed more soldiers, workers, and resources. During World War II, Korea became an important region for Japan. Korea's industries and resources were used to support Japan's war effort. During this period, the lives of millions of Korean families were affected. The burden of the war was felt directly by the Korean people as well. Then came 1945. The United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just a few days later, Japan surrendered and World War II came to an end. With Japan's defeat, Korea was finally freed from 35 years of Japanese rule. However, along with independence came a new problem. Who would govern Korea now? At that time, the world's two most powerful nations stood at the forefront: the United States, USA, and the Soviet Union, USSR. Both countries decided that Korea would be temporarily administered by dividing it into two parts. For this purpose, a line known as the 38th parallel was drawn across the map of Korea. The area north of this line came under the control of the Soviet Union, while the southern part came under the control of the United States. At first, this was only a temporary arrangement. The plan was to hold elections throughout Korea after some time and then reunify the country. But history took a different turn, and with that began Chapter 4, the Cold War, in which we will see how the Cold War divided the world into two competing ideologies. As soon as World War II ended, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union began to grow. These tensions became so deep that the world gradually split into two opposing ideological camps. The first camp was communism. It was led by the Soviet Union. According to communist ideology, the government exercises significant control over the economy. Industries and resources are owned or controlled by the state. The role of private property and private business is limited. The second camp was capitalism and democracy. It was led by the United States. Under this ideology, democratic elections are held. Private business and industry are encouraged. People generally enjoy greater personal and economic freedoms. And in the middle of this global ideological rivalry, Korea became a battleground of the Cold War. Korea was no longer just a country. It had become a focal point of the Cold War rivalry. In the north, The Soviet Union supported leaders who aligned with its interests. In the South, the United States strengthened a political system based on its own ideals. Gradually, the political thinking, governments, and policies of the two regions became completely different from one another. And in this way, by 1948, Korea had been transformed into two separate countries. In 1948, the situation changed completely. Separate governments were established in both regions. North Korea. In the north, a government was formed under the leadership of Kim Il-sung. Communism was adopted, and a centralized political system was developed. It received support from the Soviet Union and later from China. South Korea. In the South, a government was established under the leadership of Syngman Rhee. A democratic system was introduced, and it received support from the United States. The South followed a different political and economic path. One country, two paths. The Korea that had existed as a single nation for centuries had now officially become two separate countries, North Korea and South Korea. On one side was communism. On the other was democracy. On one side was the influence of the USSR and China. On the other was the support of the USA. This marked the beginning of the story of the two Koreas, a division whose impact can still be seen in global politics.
In Chapter 5, we will learn about the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. We will explore why this war started and what its consequences were. Kim Il-sung wanted to make the entire Korean peninsula communist. On June 25, 1950, North Korea launched an attack on South Korea. Now the question is, how did this war spread? Who fueled the conflict and made it even more intense? The war expanded because of the involvement of two superpowers. North Korea was supported by USSR, Soviet Union, China. South Korea was supported by United States, USA, United Nations, UN. This war was extremely destructive. Millions of people were killed, and many cities were devastated. Countless families were separated, many of them forever. In 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. The fighting stopped, but no peace treaty was ever signed. The war ended, but lasting peace was not established. As a result, North Korea and South Korea are technically still considered to be in a state of war today. The border created between the two countries is known as the DMZ, Demilitarized Zone, which is considered one of the most dangerous borders in the world. It is one of the world's most heavily guarded borders. Soldiers are stationed there at all times. The area is protected by barbed wire fences, minefields, and surveillance towers. In Chapter 6, we will see how North Korea and South Korea developed completely different ideologies and systems. After the Korean War ended in 1953, the fighting stopped, but Korea remained divided into two separate parts. While South Korea gradually moved toward democracy and integration with the global economy, North Korea chose a very different path. In North Korea, power remained in the hands of the Kim family. First, Kim Il-sung led the country. After him, his son, Kim Jong-il, took power, followed by his grandson, Kim Jong-un. As a result, North Korea became one of the few countries in the world where the same family has ruled for multiple generations. The government maintained strong control over the country. The media is closely monitored by the state, and the flow of information from the outside world is limited. Access to the internet and foreign media is also generally restricted. As part of its security policy, North Korea developed missile and nuclear programs. Because of this, it frequently remains an important topic in international news and global politics. On the other hand, South Korea focused on democratic institutions and economic development. Over time, South Korea became one of the world's leading economies. Companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, and LG, along with cultural phenomena like K-pop and Korean dramas, have given South Korea global recognition. Today, there is a significant difference between North Korea and South Korea in terms of lifestyle, economy, and political systems, even though both countries share the same historical roots. Can North Korea and South Korea reunite? This question has been asked for decades. There have been several rounds of talks between the leaders of the two countries. On some occasions, family reunion programs were also organized, giving people separated during the war a chance to meet their relatives. However, the path to reunification is not easy. There are several major challenges. The political systems of the two countries are completely different. There is a huge gap in their economic development. Security and military issues still remain. International concerns continue regarding North Korea's nuclear program. Because of these factors, the possibility of North and South Korea becoming one country remains a complex and uncertain issue. The division of Korea is not just the story of one country being split into two parts. It was the result of some of the most significant historical events of the 20th century. It all began with Japan's occupation of Korea. Then came World War II, which brought an end to Japanese rule. After that, the rivalry between the United States, USA, and the Soviet Union, USSR, reached Korea. And then, the Cold War turned a temporary division into a permanent one. That is why a once united Korea now exists as North Korea and South Korea. Both countries share the same language, culture, and history, but the events of the past several decades have led them down very different paths. Even so, for many Korean people living on both sides of the border, one dream still remains alive, that someday Korea may be reunited once again.